Hi, I'm Chris with Core Body Temp. Ever thought about how your temperature goes up and how it might affect your performance and how you can gain, again, a performance advantage of that?
Hi, Dr. Dan Plews here, back on the Physical Performance Show.
Hi, I'm Eric Hegedus, and I am the Program Director for Tufts University Physical Therapy.
Hi, it's Professor Peter Ebling, and we're discussing osteoporosis on the Physical Performance Show.
What would you say to that group of people that do realise they've got low bone density and they're only young in years?
Yeah, well, the good thing about it is you're never too old to do something about low bone density, and it can be reversed by doing some of the things we've talked about, like making sure you have a good calorie intake, but also a good protein intake. We sort of neglect protein, but the quality of the protein is also important. There have been some recent studies showing that veganism has been associated with an increased risk of osteoporosis, and it's thought perhaps that might be due to low quality protein, because you have to understand that the bone is also composed of protein as well as calcium and phosphorus. So protein intake is important as well, and avoiding the low body mass index and making sure your sex hormone levels are normal and avoiding those lifestyle factors. So if you do all of those things and maybe moderate your training schedule and reduce the intensity of training, the bone density will bounce back. And you know, that's what I've seen, in particular with these young professional cyclists who've had to actually retire from the European circuit, that once they do that and adopt a good lifestyle, their bone density really goes up quite a lot.
How much, it's always going to be, thank you for sharing there, Professor Ebling. It's always going to be individual, of course. There's responders and non-responders on a continuum, but how much bounce back is possible? So
I think you can see improvements of 5 or 10% using those approaches. And certainly in young people, we try to avoid any pharmacological treatment as much as we can. But there are some cases where they have a lot of fractures that we might give them a short course of treatment, and that will also help the bone density go up.
And that might include what sort of pharmacological agents, Professor Ebling?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about stress injuries in athletes, there is sort of limited data, and there have been studies showing that the oral bisphosphonates, which are anti-resorptive agents, they're taken as a weekly tablet. They can improve bone density in this situation, but we don't have any data showing that they reduce further stress fractures. And I know that in professional sports, there's another medication that's been used to treat osteoporosis and treat severe osteoporosis. And it's also been shown in a couple of randomized control trials to improve the healing of wrist fractures and also pelvic fractures in older women. So that is a daily injection which actually builds new bone called teriparatide. And I know that is used by some professional athletes to sort of increase the rate of healing of these stress fractures. But we don't know for sure that it does. It's just based on these other studies with complete fractures. But we haven't got any trials showing that it actually improves the healing of stress fractures, unfortunately.
And is there any potential downside or long-term impact of these pharmacological agents for patients or people in the younger demographics?
No, I think not. I think, you know, they wouldn't be used for long periods of time. With the oral bisphosphonates, the only side effects in the short term really are indigestion and a loose bowel habit, maybe the day after you take them. And in prolonged treatment, there are rarer side effects such as osteonecrosis of the jaw or another type of fracture we call atypical femur fractures, but these are usually associated with long-term use, you know, for up to 10 years or so, and aren't seen in shorter periods of time and are very uncommon. With the teriparatide, there was a concern that it shouldn't be used in young people, and it's contraindicated in adolescents. But in young adults, it's been used to treat osteoporosis in trials, and it's been useful in improving bone density. and it seems to be very safe. There was a concern that it caused osteogenic sarcoma in rats. So if you're a rat, it's not a good drug to take. But there's been a long registry study going for 15 years, and of over 1 or 2 million people that took the drug over that time, there were only 2 cases of bone cancer, which would be expected. And for that reason, in the United States, this drug used to be limited to 2 years of treatment over a lifetime, but people can now take it for as long as they need to.
And so teriparatide for Teo, how may that be administered? And obviously this is not medical advice, just general information. It's not specific to someone's circumstance, but what would administration potentially look like?
Yeah, so with teriparatide, when we use it for treating severe osteoporosis, it's given as a daily injection from a pen. So patients have to learn how to give the injection themselves. It can be associated with some side effects such as headache, giddiness, or dizziness and nausea. And some people, for that reason, have to take it in the evenings before they go to bed to minimise those side effects. But most people learn how to use the pen device pretty readily. But having said that, there's probably quite a large proportion that don't want to have the medication because of the nature of the administration as an injection.
And is that ongoing indefinitely, or is there periods on and off?
In Australia, we talk about Australia, it's limited to 2 years per lifetime that you can take teriparatide. Whether or not that'll change in Australia like it has in the United States, I'm not sure.
This program, this show, Eric, has certainly highlighted this across different colleagues of yours, such as Stu Warden there in the US, who shared around the effect of intensity on the magnitude of bone loading and therefore the heightened risk of potential bone stress injury. It's something I've had to work through with multiple bone stress injuries in recent times, is really appreciating that even a slight increase in intensity changes the overall workload, as we've already discussed today. Tips that you can share around how to add intensity and ensure that things don't go south.
Yeah, so that is always a tough one. Again, you've noted that. I mean, you who in your physiotherapy and exercise physiology brain know better. There's a very primal sort of lizard brain that likes to compete, and I think all you can do is, as much as possible, keep that athlete in the moment, keep them into body awareness, and the effect that their intensity is having on not only their symptoms, which are largely now disappearing by this phase, but also on their general health, happiness, muscle soreness, ability to sleep well, all of those things. I try to just keep them aware again of the big picture and away from a very natural thing with runners, which is, I did this workout in 5 minutes and 35 seconds last time. This time has to be 5:30 or better. I don't think you have to PR every time out. And I think I try to keep them away from that focus and onto the bigger picture.
Gosh, that's so powerful. It doesn't have to be a PR every workout compared to what you did last time. There can't be linear progressions. There just can't be. There's going to become a finite point where that's no longer achievable. So I think that's such a great point, Eric. And then, you're right that if an athlete can complete workouts, obviously this is over a process of time, then they should be considering participation in competition again.
Right. That's exactly right. And as you noted, big difference between participation. And that is, hey, I'm back with my team. Hooray, I'm back with my group that I run with. That's fantastic, because psychologically, that's a wonderful thing. That is not return to competition. Return to competition is a different animal. And there is still a way to go there to get to competition form. But again, I would argue, if I view this paper as a linear progression, and therefore I will have waited till they've returned to participation to start thinking about return to competition, I have already failed my athlete. I should be thinking about return to competition in phase 1 of this, where you are thinking, okay, what is their competition? What do they like to do? They're a middle distance runner. So I need to do short, intense bouts of cross training to mentally ready them for return to competition. You should be thinking about that from the get-go and not wait until the end. And I think I see that too much as people get very linear with their thinking here and are saying, well, okay, you've returned to participation now. You don't need to see me anymore. You just go ahead and train with your team and eventually you'll get ready to go. And I'm not saying that the physio can't let go a little bit and put it more in the hands of the coach at some point. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just saying if you've waited that long and then all of a sudden you lose track of your athlete, there is a large step between return to participation and return to competing. And that large step, you begin to fill that gap on day 1 of rehab.
Yeah, so it has to start, as you say, day 1, thinking about the competition schedule, the goals, that goal setting.
I think the classic model of training is being challenged a bit or extended. Let's call it extended, because we're saying, hey, it's not just what you can measure with the VO2 max and the threshold and the efficiency lab tests that we've done for decades. That we see that athletes, there's something about duration, about their ability to just maintain their function, their physiological capacity longer, and then also their ability to do those tough, high intensity bouts of exercise later in a race. And that's a development that keeps happening perhaps over years, even after VO2 max has peaked out and threshold power has peaked out and so forth. So this is what we're trying to get to understand, and then also to try to help athletes think about, well, how do I train this?
So is it fair to say, Dr. Seiler, the likes of Eliud Kipchoge, or Paula Radcliffe, who it's well reported, say for Paula's case, hit a higher VO2 max earlier in her career than the world record marathon at the time. But this concept of durability developed over years could be one of the factors that explains, for example, a Paula Radcliffe marathon PB after her VO2 max was on the decline.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much it declined, but it certainly plateaued much earlier in her career than her peak performance. And of course, the case study that has been published by Andrew Jones kind of goes through that of the different time sequences. And I wrote about this, actually, it's like 2 decades ago, that says there was basically these different time frames for VO2 max. That happens really early. We hit peak VO2 max quite early in the training career of an endurance athlete. And then the threshold, or FTP, or however you want to, there's different ways of describing it, maximum lactate steady state, that adaptive set of things seems to happen a bit later. And then the last or another issue is efficiency, or economy, just putting in the kilometers on the road or on the bike and optimizing your ability to generate a certain watts or a certain pace with the lowest possible energy expenditure. So and these seem to happen with different sequencing. And then I guess of what we're starting to see it's related to efficiency, but is that this issue of being able to extend to go longer without deteriorating. And there is, I think it's really important for all exercisers and athletes to understand there really is no such thing as a steady state, a physiological steady state. It's all quasi, in the sense that if you go long enough at even that low intensity talking pace, you deteriorate, both due to energy availability, your glycogen depletion, also just mechanical damage to muscle fibers, maybe some neurological changes, oxidative stress, the so-called free radicals. So there are just deterioration processes that are happening in the body that make themselves visible or relevant as things start to stretch, as the hours increase. And what we seem to see is that those athletes that have done a lot of low intensity training, they get more durable. Which is to say, an example of increased durability would be that they do not show the heart rate drift as much, or it's delayed. You don't see that so-called uncoupling between heart rate and pace power as early or as significantly. I saw that was one of the first things I saw with myself when I started training again, is that, I started, the first few months I get kind of up to a decent intensity, but then over the next 6 months, what happens is I am getting more durable, and my heart rate was not inflecting and going up after 90 minutes as much. It was staying flatter. And so a 3-hour ride was just more, more comfortable for me. The last hour didn't feel as stressful. And so I think this takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes doing those more extensive workouts. We always talk about intensity, but we need to also think about, I'm making up a word here, extensity. I mean, what's your extensity? What is your ability to stretch and to last longer at that low intensity comfortably and be in a homeostasis, in a rhythm, in a flow, without because we've all experienced that low intensity session that feels good initially. You reach a point where it doesn't feel good anymore. It doesn't hurt in the same way that a high intensity session does, but you go empty. And you can't seem to mobilize. The body is just not responding to the call of duty in the same way. And so maybe that's a new word for the day is, what's your extensity? What's the,
I can see that on a t-shirt with a Dr. Stephen Seiler face on it. What's your extensity? Can you give some examples or just practical tips on how long do people need to, say they're starting off the back of this episode, they go and get themselves set up to get this data. What do they do from there? They need to get a 7-day average and a longer average over time. And then when do you start to actually use the data to inform?
Yeah, I mean, it gets pretty complex, but fortunately, the coaching app like HRV for training, it'll do it all for you. But in a nutshell, what has to happen is what's really important is that HRV is very, very individual. So if we take our HRV, Brad, that we could get very, very different values. So it's not a case of saying, 10 is good, 5 is bad. 10 for me might be good, but it actually might be bad for you because it's not within your normal realms of your averages and your baseline numbers. So what you have to do first is you have to get at least 2 weeks of baseline data. And then basically establish upper and lower thresholds of that. So say you've got 2 to 4 weeks of baseline data, and you want that data to be at a period of time well, you're not really pushing the envelope in terms of training, but you're still keeping fit, you're still keeping healthy, so it's kind of a normal baseline. And then what you do is, and this is what HRV for Training coaching app does, is it establishes what we call the smallest worthwhile change. So that's a barrier, an upper threshold and a lower threshold. So if you imagine that then you've got your HRV rolling along, we usually use a 7-day rolling average to see how that's rolling along throughout a training block. But then above that rolling average, you'll have one line that's your upper value of your smallest worthwhile change. And then below that, you'll have a lower value of your smallest worthwhile change. And then you can see, okay, if you're doing a decent training block and things are going well, you can expect to see that HRV gradually trend up and perhaps even go above the smallest worthwhile change. Whereas if things are going bad, HRV rolling average over time will come down. You're doing too much intensity perhaps, and that can be a sign that you might need to rest. You might need to look at your sleep, your nutrition, adjust your training intensity distribution that I see a lot. People can get that wrong. And that's how you run it. I mean, it's very complicated to actually establish those thresholds. You have to use 0.5 of the coefficient variation for those 4 weeks, which is probably too complicated for most people, but you don't have to do it because you can just download, an app and it'll do it for you. Like HRV for Training Coach app will actually do that for you. So people don't have to think this sounds way too much like hard work. It really isn't. Yeah. So
possibly the hard work's just getting set up and started, overcoming that inertia.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get it going, I mean, once you get that going and you use it and you're using something like an Oura ring, it's nothing at all. It's no work. I mean, as you interviewed my athlete Javi Gomez. He uses the Oura ring and he's been using it for ages, and we found it to be really, really effective and a great way for him to keep his data. Something is better than nothing is what I always think. And I actually published a paper in the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance that was like, okay, if you can't do 7 days in a week, if you can't take 7 recordings, what is the minimal amount that we need to get a valued measure? And it's somewhere between 3 and 4. After 3 and 4, 3 or 4 measures, you're not really getting much more benefit. So that's kind of, what is the minimum? And that's kind of, we showed that in that paper. So there you go. But those who are a bit lazy out there, you only need 3.
So why should I monitor my core body temperature? And the first answer for an athlete, a lot of the things we've been talking about is coaching and prescribing this for the athletes. So for an athlete's point of view, the first thing that you should be is become aware, really becoming aware of your temperature and how that is affecting your performance. People just start noticing things, or they look down and they didn't realize they were so hot. And when they're doing those intervals, when their temperature goes up, if you think about it, so say you're doing interval training, right? Those last intervals, your temperature's going up. One of the reasons those last intervals are so hard sometimes is because your temperature is higher. So seeing that correlation of your temperature going up and how it is affecting your performance, that's one of the first big awarenesses. And then what people are doing with that information is they can see that they know if their temperature is going up, or before your temperature goes up, it's easier to keep your temperature lower than it is to get hot and try to pull that temperature out. So it's sort of like dehydration. It's easier to drink all the time and try to keep hydrated. Once you get dehydrated, it takes a longer to recover. So it's easier to prevent. And so the first part is awareness and how it affects you. So we had some of Olympic athletes that were adjusting their pace based on core temperature.
Yeah, too. We're trying to avoid that core temperature elevating because, as you say, it takes a lot longer for that core temperature to come down than it does for it to be avoided, that jump, by manipulating effort, I guess.
Right. And some of the teams were doing strategic cooling. So they were figuring out how to cool the guys down to try to keep the lower temperatures. One Olympic organization, I'm not sure I can name them. It was really good because normally what happens is as your core temperature goes up, you need to adjust your pace. You need to slow down, basically. Mm-hmm. And the Olympic organization said, yes, that's correct, but that's not how you win gold medals, which I thought was good. So the things you can do about it is, one is being aware, trying to cool off before you get there, and that's just keeping that evaporation process. You can see during Tokyo, a lot of people just pouring water on your head. So trying to cool yourself before you get hot. If you, in a triathlon, knowing we have people in the transitions that actually temperature seems to rise a lot in the transition time. Mm. So being aware of that and doing certain things around those areas, they have some strategies built in there. And then during the event, trying to cool off. We have people on bikes now looking at not only just aero position, but aero versus cooling, as you saw with the Norwegians. And there's some ingenious products coming out soon that are also involved in cooling, especially in the bikes and things like that. And also, if you're racing, like road racing, if you're coming up to a hill, so what we try to do is, if you're aware of your temperature, you can see that you're warmer or something and you have a climb coming up in 10K, or try to cool before that period. And because when you do the climb, your temperature is going to rise. And so if you can do a little bit to cool off beforehand, splashing water on your body for that evaporation process, getting a little bit more air for the air circulation for convection cooling. And then when you get to the climb, your temperature is going to go up. So if you can start a climb at 38 degrees and your competitor starts at 38.5, you're going to have an advantage at the top. Your performance will drop less than his will, most likely. So it's just being aware of that. And a good one that people don't think about, and this is again because of our perception of how we think of things or what we feel versus what's happening. Say you descend the other side of the hill. Your body has all this sweat and it's evaporating, and your body's now saying, oh, I'm cooling off quick, so I don't feel hot. But your body's still hot when you get to the bottom of the climb. So, all that sweat's evaporated away. So that's actually the time to wet yourself again. Spread your water on your body to get that evaporation process continuing happening to try to keep dropping your temperature. And that's one where our perception is different from the reality, and where you can still be proactive to try to decrease your temperature to have the advantage there.